Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Solidarity Live. I'm here with Alex. We have 1 week till the election, which feels absolutely insane. How are you this morning, Alex?
It's 2020. Still 2020. This week was the most 2020 of all 2020. So I'm feeling a lot of it. But luckily, we have a guest joining us today who I feel can really cut through the clutter and tell us what it all means. Not to put too much pressure on you, Daniel Marans, a senior reporter with HuffPost, and a good friend and a very astute analyst of what's going on. Daniel, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. You gave me a little bit of a promotion there. Technically, I'm not a senior reporter, but
yeah, I definitely gave you a promotion.
I'm headed there, so it was predictive.
That's fine. It's just demotions that you don't. Your field promotions are fine. They're valid. Take it to HR, Marans. It's fine. Just last night there was the debate. I think it was, like, from my perspective, it was very tense because what everyone was waiting for was like some big thing, right? Was this going to be a big thing? Was this it? Was there going to be a catastrophic? And then it ended up being actually the most normal of all political things that I've seen this cycle involving the presidential. And they sort of duked it out. Trump is just a really pathological liar. He just kept hitting his lies, but he couldn't even stick with them that much. So it sort of just came out maybe with Biden a little bit up is what I thought it ended with. And if anything, maybe even Trump, the bubble that he speaks to definitely loved his performance, but I don't know if it really spoke to anyone else. That's what I saw.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I tried to look, I think you pointed out a couple different things there. And so to start, obviously it was operating from a low bar, and that low bar was the first presidential debate, which was a nightmare because Trump just interrupted constantly. So right away we had a structural change here that made that impossible, and that was the ability to mute the microphones. I mean, that was something that the Presidential Debate Commission instituted ahead of this debate, because last time, I thought Chris Wallace was gonna, walk away crying. It was so clearly unbearable for him. He really lost control. But I think the other thing is that Trump, maybe with his back up against the wall, decided to not act like a complete asshole, right? I mean, he acted kind of like a normal political candidate in terms of his demeanor, for the most part. You even started to see him, he would get into like an aggressive attack line and he'd be like, "But that's not true, Joe." And he would kind of tone himself down, a little bit. "Is it, Joe? I don't know." And you could tell that he was really controlling his inner id there. As you said, obviously, right now, the fundamental macro dynamics of this race are pretty locked in. That's the sort of out of control COVID-19 pandemic and Trump's handling of it, the accompanying economic fallout that Trump has failed to really also take control of by shepherding a major relief package through Congress. And with that in mind, Trump can either he really needed a fundamentally new dynamic, what I call the home run, in order to, I think, change the main dynamics of this race, which are that he's doing much more poorly, according to the polls, than he was against Hillary Clinton at this time. So even if the polls have a margin of error, even if there are the silent Trump voters, it's very hard to imagine that he can make up that ground. And I don't think that anything that happened last night really gave him room to do that. That said, I think that, I think he is in some ways, personally, I think he may be a little bit quicker on his feet in some ways than Biden. And so he has a lot of ways of dissembling about his handling of the coronavirus and appealing to people. Now that social distancing and the lockdowns have been so successful, there are probably parts of the country where when he says the cure can't be worse than the disease, that it might have some appeal. And but at the end of the day, I think on some of the core strengths for Democrats, things like healthcare, things like infrastructure, jobs, how to move forward after the pandemic, Trump didn't really bring anything new to the table, and I think that will show up in Biden's favor.
Well, and Daniel, I want to talk a little bit about your recent article about how Trump has essentially broken all of his populist campaign promises. So, one, what prompted you to write that? And two, do you think people really realize the hypocrisy in what he promised versus what his administration delivered? Because I don't see that being talked about enough.
It's a good question, and it's, I mean, we have data points, right? I was just on a call yesterday with Working America, which is the AFL-CIO's arm for non-union workers, and Matt Morrison, the executive director there, really thinks that it has broken through, and that even before the pandemic, Trump was not doing well, and that is a key reason why, and that he was going back to how Trump's effort to put tariffs on steel did not actually end up swaying the Connor Lamb race in Pennsylvania and in Southwest PA, where steel remains a thing. So I think that there is definitely evidence of that, right? There are polls, though, that suggest that the overall public, Trump has a slight edge on the economy writ large, whatever that means. I think in terms of sort of deeper metrics, does he have my interests at heart? Healthcare, which I count as one of the areas where Trump promised one thing and has done another. The public has now basically seen that this guy is essentially a lot like other Republicans. That's my overall impression. I was spurred to write this because this is something that Bernie has really seized on from the get-go, that instead of making this about Trump's personality and his decency, where views are more locked in tribally already, taking a look at the things that might have made him appealing to some people who were just looking for something new to try, and saying he hasn't lived up to that. He hasn't lived up to his promises to revive manufacturing, to pass an infrastructure bill, to provide universal health care coverage, to negotiate lower drug prices, and on and on and on.
To protect
and I think, just one little thing, the infrastructure bill in particular, in a place like Pennsylvania, where Trump is trying to make fracking a wedge issue, a lot of the labor unions in the building trades, for example, where members do lean conservative, and they believe that their own membership reflects kind of the national divide. That's what they've told me, rather than the larger labor movement, where Democrats typically enjoy something like a 75-25 edge or something like that. They feel, and guys who represent areas where there are large concentrations of these people, Matt Cartwright in Northeast PA, who is a progressive Democrat who represents an area that Trump won. I mean, he's really not even that moderate, but he finds a way to sort of thread the needle. I just saw Bob Casey said this. There's a state senator, John Udicak, from that area who I spoke to, who actually left the Democratic caucus because he thought they weren't friendly enough toward fracking jobs and all that stuff. But he's sticking with Biden, and he said that he thinks that if Trump had passed an infrastructure bill, the election wouldn't even be competitive and Trump would win re-election. I don't know if that's true, but that's the sense, that infrastructure in particular is one area where it would have been so on brand in terms of Trump's emphasis on jobs, but he just has this disinterest in really governing, and as a result, he never, it just became infrastructure week every week, and Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell wanted to prioritize ACA repeal and these lopsided tax cuts, and I think that's I think that he's paid a political price for that, certainly.
I think you can see it extremely easily with seniors, that you're looking at a once in a generation demographic shift. And COVID response, the fact that he keeps going on TV and being like, look, only old people die from this. They're dying like flies, but it's only old people. And you're like, they can hear you. And then people are wondering, but he's killing old people, but he's also robbing old people with his stuff around Social Security. And seniors are not stupid. They listened. He was really unique on Social Security. Lip service, Republicans have been doing dances like that for a long time. But on Social Security, in the primaries, when he was running, he'd stand on stage and he'd point at the other Republicans and be like, I'm not going to take your Social Security. I'm not going to cut your Medicare. I'm not going to cut your Medicaid. I'm the only one. And he was the only one. And then immediately he just went right into establishment Republican orthodoxy, like literally the first thing the Republicans did when they took the House, when they had the new Congress, was try to eliminate the Office on Ethics. That's the first thing. The second thing they did was Johnson's Social Security bill, moving it out of committee, which would have destroyed Social Security. And now we're seeing seniors just fleeing Donald Trump. So is it because they suddenly realize that he's a narcissistic asshole? Like, no, I think it's actually policy stuff. And I think there's also, I like your analysis that there's this policy stuff. People are willing to give like non-politicians a chance. Like, let's see if they shake things up. But then after you have years and nothing has been shaken up, and in fact, it's just been incompetence, that's a really hard thing to wave your hands about. And economics and tariffs and foreign trade and things like that are a few steps removed. I think he still does have, I'm not one to ever minimize his ability as a flim-flam man, as a con man, as a talker. He's really good at TV. He's way better at TV than most politicians because he's a TV guy. But when his message is, don't believe that your friends and family have died, like that, it's so ridiculous. And he believes it because in his little bubble, it probably seems like it's far removed, but for everywhere else, it's terrifying. So I think your piece.
I think, can I just say, yeah, and I just want to throw one thing in there if I could cut in. I really think that the COVID thing, of all the things that you mentioned in terms of the seniors moving away, look, we do have the data, right? So his numbers with seniors, his lead is totally erased, which is very unusual for Republicans in recent election cycles. I mean, that's really where a lot of their margin is. These folks, for a variety of reasons, those who still survive at that age, lean more conservative or have in recent election cycles. And there are complicated reasons for that, but fine. They've really moved away from Trump, and this shows up in the data. As much as he did, he embraced Social Security cuts in his budgets, particularly to the disability program. And of course, you have these bills that always move through the Republican Congress. For better, I think that debate, unfortunately, because it wasn't this big national knockdown, drag out fight like ACA repeal, I don't know if it seeped quite into the average voter's consciousness. But I would hear over and over again, speaking especially to older voters in Pennsylvania. I just came back from a long trip to Pennsylvania. And I would hear it over and over again. He doesn't even wear a mask. Why isn't he listening to the doctors? Why is he making light of this issue? There are even people who are still thinking of voting for him who told me they didn't appreciate that. So that comes through. And the flip side is on the economic stuff. With the unemployment bump up that Democrats did and the $1,200 check, there are still some people who are like, well, actually, this is okay. Now, and they can, not see the. I'm not saying it's the majority, but I would hear that. I would hear, I like that check. So I think all
Payroll
this is.
tax, seems, I mean, the data is showing, has broken through. That I think there's a few, but that was such an unforced error on Donald Trump's part, because no one wanted it. Republicans in Congress didn't want, right? He did that. It's the Three Stooges of the Apocalypse. Larry Kudlow, Stephen Moore, and I'm missing the third, and Peter Navarro, who really wanted to push this. And it's just defunding Social Security. Like, he made it an issue. And that, after the COVID response, is really whose side are you on thing, right? Like, because policy is really, I think, and you tell me what you think, but Jocelyn's going to get a question in here as well. She can close it out. But policy is understood not in a white paper way, right? It's understood in a really personal way. And so it usually comes down to whose side is somebody on? Like, are they fighting for me, or are they fighting for the bosses, Wall Street, the people who are on the other side? And then a lot of what people do is just try to define the villains and then say they're on the other side of it. But it's really hard when, he's saying, oh, it's China. China's the villain. They did the virus. And people have televisions and know that around the world, it's not as abject a failure as it is here. And then Donald Trump wants to rob them. So I don't know, did you hear anything about the payroll tax cut, or did that not break through with folks you were talking to?
Anecdotally, I hadn't heard much about it, but I know that, that it's something Democrats have said that
Jocelyn, I try to get Marans to look into that all the time. I incessantly email him, and I'm like, this is authority. It's Social Security.
Yeah. No, Alex, to your point about trust and these broader issues of whose side you're on, I think it was a cuter act for him to be running against the establishment when he was not the establishment, when he was not the sitting president, right? And so for him, what was it? It was, we're working very hard on getting those kids back with their families. It's really hard, and all this stuff, right? He's doing the last minute stuff on prescription drugs. That's, kind of window dressing. And he had a lot of lines, against Biden, where he was like, you've been there 47 years. What have you done? And well, by the same logic, you've been there 4 years and you promised to really change everything, and you haven't even released your tax returns. I thought it was really interesting how Trump started to go down the road of talking about Hunter Biden's sort of sleazy dealings in Ukraine and China, which, though they are not technically illegal, definitely were really weird and messed up. And Biden just said, well, I mean, I had nothing to do with that. But by the way, what about your Chinese bank account? And what about your inability to pay taxes? And Trump was, I think he was caught flat-footed. He was put on the defensive, and he just sort of said, oh, it's under audit. I'll release it when I can,
Daniel,
Jocelyn.
The thing I really liked about your article and everything we're talking about here is there does seem to be a political blind spot about what really drew voters to Trump. And I think you've pointed that out in a couple of different ways. Do you think that we're going to learn from this, or do you think it's just going to be the same mistakes over and over again?
Well, the prediction game.
Oh, sorry. Is that not a good question? Do you not want to make predictions?
No, I'm just laughing about it. I just came back from Pennsylvania. I was in a Carpenters Union Hall in Scranton, and Matt Cartwright, again, the congressman there, was speaking to the rank and file members who were making calls for him, Joe Biden, and a local state rep. And I interviewed him, and I said to him, well, Jennifer Palmieri, Hillary Clinton's advisor, said after the election it was white supremacy. Look, there's obviously a higher tolerance threshold for some of these horrific, inflammatory, racist remarks, and among certain elements of the population. And I did meet, I would meet a lot of, frankly, white working class people in Pennsylvania, across Eastern Pennsylvania, just this past time, for whom, like, voting Obama was sort of just like, it was going through the motions for them, and they were going to be looking for somebody who reflected their, more anti-immigration or generally more conservative values that they just hadn't yet been activated. So he was sort of like an activating agent. But maybe there was a minority of them, but a significant minority, who were sort of just like, either they stayed home or they cast a vote for change. And Obama was a vote for change in 2008 and 12, and Trump was in 2016. And that's the way Matt Cartwright framed it to me. And Matt Cartwright said, of course, this is a politician's answer, but he said, you're going to call the 33,000 people in my district who voted for Trump in 16 and me in the same election. That's what he estimates. White supremacists? Sorry, I'm not calling my constituents white supremacists. Like, it doesn't work that way. And I think there's something to be said for the idea that even if it's true, it's not an effective tactic, right? I mean, sort of like telling poor white people about their white privilege. Like, if you have trouble paying the bills and getting health insurance, it's probably true that you have privilege relative to Black people, when it comes to dealing with the police, but it may not be an effective political organizing talking point. I think Joe Biden certainly, oddly enough, understands that, but I do think that there are definitely forces in the Democratic Party who would really rather this be a Hillary Clinton redux debate about the dignity of the office and the decency of the human beings. And, most people for whom, whose lives are a little bit harder, of all races, tend to put less of an emphasis, I find, on rhetoric and on kind of the niceties, things that are, about kind of the dignity of the office, et cetera. They also tend to pay less attention to, the news in general. And so I think to get those non-voters out and to, bring some of these Obama Trump voters back into the fold to the extent possible, and to build as enduring a coalition as possible. And that's especially true, when you look at Senate races, because of the bias toward rural white constituencies in the Senate. You really got to, what's in it for me? What have you done for me lately? You have to answer those questions. And so that's a real concern, because I think running the Hillary playbook is probably going to, and I'm not saying Biden has done that entirely, right? Yeah, he is running ads about his prescription drug plan, for example, but it's not necessarily front and center in the messaging of his messaging and that of other surrogates. And I think it's enough this time, because the country has now seen 4 years of Trump, and frankly, Biden just does not have the same negatives as Hillary. But it would be a shame, if that were the takeaway, that there's no need to change the playbook.
Well, that's very insightful and helpful. Even if you didn't want to make predictions, that was very good. Alex, do you have
I'm not predicting that they'll screw it up, because I hope that they don't. But yeah, they'll probably screw it up.
Well, here's hoping you're wrong. But yeah, I tend to agree with you. Alex, do you have any other questions?
I'm seeing, we know it's coming, but the austerity people, the Republicans seem to be lining it up. Like I think Sass's leaked phone call, and then Cornyn saying, "Oh, I voted against him on the deficit secretly." Like, what are you even talking about, Big John? But they're lining it up to really hamstring any relief effort. And, I think the media, for the most part, the corporate media will be super complicit in that. But I am seeing that we don't know, but I'm seeing that there are indications that the Biden people, Biden land, as we, think of them, learned a lot from the mistakes of Obama right away. Like the talk of not getting a stimulus that's so small that it fails, and then people are like, see, that didn't work.
Undermines its own rationale, yeah.
And also not holding people accountable, the whole, like, we're only looking forward. There's rhetoric that I see floating around about, talking about the acts of criminality that have occurred, and that there needs to be a reckoning on those. Do you think there's a tension there between the sort of old timer establishment play, which is going to be like, let's just get back to normal? But I do feel like there is a part of Biden land that actually understands there's no going back to normal. There's only building our vision of what we need to do going forward. And that includes enormous amounts of money, spending enormous amounts of money, like actual infrastructure, but peer public infrastructure, and also holding people accountable. I know that I will be actively pushing. I think the biggest mistakes of the Obama presidency were right at the beginning. They were front loaded. No bankers went to prison, and the stimulus was too small. After you had those two things locked in, it was really hard to change course. What do you think about that?
The stimulus was too small, and they convened a deficit reduction commission before the Republicans took Congress, right? Everybody always brings up the Republicans taking Congress. Bowles-Simpson was convened while Democrats had unified control, and you and I know that from personal experience. But Alex, I am not optimistic at all that the federal government will pursue criminal charges against Donald Trump. Period. It's not
Donald Trump. I don't think it's Donald Trump. I think that that's very difficult. But I think that there's child separation. There have been illegal acts by minions that I think will possibly be rolled up.
My prediction is that, constitutionally, in terms of Biden's constitution, I mean, not in capital C constitution, that's just not how he rolls generally. And that we'll see more of that action at the state level in New York over financial shenanigans. That would be my guess. I don't know for sure. The second thing, in terms of austerity politics and deficit reduction, there was a concerning remark from sort of Biden advisor Ted Kaufman that well, it's going to be even harder to finance some of the things we want to finance because they spent all the money on tax cuts, right? Which, for those of us who understand that money is just an illusion, and really, you just got to think about whether there's inflation as a problem or not, and even, we could have higher tolerance for inflation than we currently have. That's a source of concern, and I think generally Biden has been pretty opaque about what his priorities are going to be in those first 100 days. We saw him last night say that immigration reform would be a priority in the first 100 days. And I think COVID relief would be too. But, again, I think there's no telling. And when you have the figures that are around him, Steve Ricchetti, Anita Dunn, Bruce Reed, these are classic third way DLC type / swamp creatures. And you're looking at Ron Klain, who is sort of a more liberal third way type, and progressives are saying, well, that's the one that we want in charge instead of Steve Ricchetti. Your choices are not that great there. So I would caution vigilance and healthy pessimism and skepticism.
I like that.
But last night, he did go bold on climate. I think that climate activists were really amped up about how forthright he was about the need to transition away from fossil fuels and invest in this new energy economy. So, I think Biden himself is the same things that progressives have been critical of him for, which is that he rides the wave, right? In the 80s and 90s, that wave was, really tough on crime, draconian stuff, and pro free trade and pro deregulation. Now the wave is going a different way. So maybe his calculating nature will end up pleasantly surprising everybody.
Daniel, thank you so much for being on. Is there anything else you want to add before we let you go? I know we kept you a little bit over.
No, it's all good. Thanks so much for having me.
It's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, I was the optimist there. I thought that was pretty fun. But I like, what Daniel was saying about vigilance and the need to just stay on top of what's going on, Jocelyn. We always say that it's the people are going to have to box in the politicians. Like, the politicians aren't going to lead. The people are going to have to lead.
Well, and I really like the article because I think it's really important to acknowledge that the reason people went for Trump the first cycle are not going to repeat necessarily, one. And two, they're not sinister. I don't know what this desire is to vilify a significant portion of America. Of course, you have your skinheads, your white supremacist type people. Those people exist, but they're not a political majority. They're not even really a meaningful minority. What you have are a lot of disenfranchised people who are easily manipulated. And that is something that we have to take responsibility for in our political life. For why was that allowed to happen? Why was it so easy for that to happen? 2016 was Hillary Clinton's to win. And I personally do not hear nearly enough contrition for the people who failed to make that happen. Are you still pissed about that, or is this just me?
Yeah, I try to keep my anger more recent. So,
but it's the same people. They're still here.
There are a lot of the same people, but I can also go and make my anger more distant. I worked at Media Matters tracking neo-Nazis and the right-wing militia movement, and its sort of symbiotic existence with right-wing media in 2010. And you can read all of my team's stuff, and we predicted, like, people were not realizing the power and influence that was growing out of like real neo-Nazis. Like, these are live in the mountains, hoarding their guns and bombs, and are violent, terrible people. But it was getting mainstream through, like, Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck would talk about things, and there's this feedback loop that happens. That we were exposing and trying to short circuit, but people just don't take it seriously. If you have a bunch of neo-Nazis, like literal the worst deplorables, like murderous thugs, and they're in their mountains with their guns, and they're talking about stuff using their language, and then they see somebody on Fox News like Glenn Beck talking about things using their language, they're not going to see that as like, oh, that's our guy. They actually are going to become more extreme, because what was, mainstream, they're like, oh, okay, well, now we're going to be more violent, more everything. And they keep doing that, and the whole media infrastructure just kept going with them, right? And then you see the creation of Breitbart and these billionaires pouring money into this right-wing machine. And what I think you're pointing at is these, the carrying tiki torches, white nationalists, they totally exist. And they're, maybe redeemable, but many of them are irredeemable.
Right.
But the problem was that it was able to influence a giant segment that are not going to carry the tiki torches, but actually are hearing, Tucker Carlson, and he's actually mirroring ideas and rhetoric from the actual white nationalist movement. And that is propagating and getting out there. And it's not, I don't put like a ton of blame, because the corporate media are terrible, but like, politicians should have stood up and realized what was happening way earlier on. And they're starting to now. They're starting to realize the real danger that comes from allowing, violent, reactionary militia, paramilitary forces sort of being mainstream. Like, oh no, it's just okay. They just take over the state house with their guns and stuff. Like, that being normalized is horrible. And the alternative has not been given still to this day. Like, the the idea that you could fight that with just decency is not real. It has to be fought with laws. It has to be fought with enforcement. It has to be fought with reforming the police so that they're not actually infiltrated by these white nationalists, which again is not like some science fiction movie. Like that's what happened in the guy who broke John Lewis's head with the stick was a sheriff, right? Like the KKK takes over the militant organs of the state to perpetrate white supremacy on the people. Like that is what we have to fight against. And the government needs to take real action to do that. So I'm hoping that, what we're doing when we're organizing and we're, boxing politicians in is met also with an acknowledgement by politicians and elected leaders and the media that they can't just smile and be blasé about what's going on. Like white nationalist militia members tried to kidnap and plan to kidnap a governor based on the rhetoric that was deemed acceptable by the Republican Party and by members of the media.
I think the problem is it's so absurd that it's one, almost comical, and two, not believable. Like when you hear that a fringe group of reactionaries are going to try to kidnap the governor, it sounds fake and it sounds a little funny. I mean, the memes were on fire that week. Do you remember, Alex? Like lots of Nicolas Cages, I'm going to kidnap the Constitution/governor of Michigan. Like this is the problem. It's gotten, people are starting to take it seriously, but we're taking it seriously way too late. And back to what Daniel was saying, I do like that we're acknowledging these two presidential races are not the same. Like Joe Biden is not Hillary Clinton. I think he does appeal a lot more to these working class people. But at the same time, this can of worms that's been open in the past 5-10 years is not going to just go away. These people aren't going to disappear because we win the election.
Absolutely not. I mean, the ease with which people deny the reality that austerity leads to fascism every single time is the mind-boggling part to me. So because they want to get into a debate of like, well, is it economics or racism? And you're like, look, let's just stipulate there are racists, white nationalists, and they exist. What we're talking about is hopelessness. And that's what austerity creates, hopelessness. And if you need any other metric, look at the opioid overdose crisis that this country faces now and faced for years, right? Austerity leads to fascism. Austerity leads to extremism. We see it every single time. And until we address that fundamental part, then we're not actually getting at the root of it. It'll just be clipping some leaves. But we need actual enforcement. And then root causes is we need to work so that the money in this country is not just concentrated in the hands of a few billionaires, that working people get the fruits of their own labor, and that the banks, Daniel was talking about pushing the return key to just create money, which is how we actually do it. People think of printing presses, but that's way down the road and a very narrow corner. Usually it's just pushing the return key on a keyboard. We put trillions of dollars into the bank accounts of these banks while people are asked to, somehow survive with no money in the middle of a pandemic on a $1,200 check once for half a year. Like, if we don't actually have oodles and oodles, trillions of dollars pumped into the economy through working people's pockets, not through big banks, bank accounts, then we will not be able to move past where we are right now. It's just a fundamental truth in my analysis that is so obvious. It's why the small stimulus, the economic collapse, that he couldn't quite get back on track. And then he turned to austerity. This is Obama I'm talking about, what Daniel is saying. If Biden wins and then doesn't actually just flood the economy with dollar bills, we will not be able to move on. We will be stuck in a place where we're grinding and fighting over scraps for the entirety of the next presidential term.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that. I mean, look, the thing that I like and hate is that this fight is not about any one particular candidate or race or cause. As we discuss ad nauseum on here, it is an entire political paradigm shift that we have to make away from accepting the bare minimum when it comes to economic justice, climate justice, gender justice, racial justice, whatever. We have to really be bold and say, we deserve to live in a world that is not literally and figuratively on fire. This is not a big ask. And we shouldn't accept a narrative and a version of storytelling, which makes it a big ask. Because you're right, any version of austerity is just going to make things worse. And it's not even going to take that long, as we have learned in 2020.
Yes, 2020 has been, although it's also been an incredibly slow year. The time dilation, like this week was definitely 4 years long.
100%.
I think what Daniel was talking about, going around Pennsylvania and talking to voters, I was actually sort of poking him on the Social Security stuff, because he is very wet blankety is what I would say on Social Security, because I'm always pitching him on Social Security stories, and I think, and he covers it. He's actually one of the few journalists who actually gets the importance of Social Security for people. But he's also like, you're literally the executive director of Social Security Works. You always think that I should talk about Social Security. But the truth is that it does work. And the reason I think it's so important as everything is it is putting money in the pockets of people. It's our money, we earn it, but it's something that we all do together. And it reduces inequality. It literally redistributes money from the billionaire class into the pockets of working people. And in doing that, it is a stabilizer on our society. And it's really, not to be too fluffy about it, but talk to Republicans, they love it. Democrats, they love it. Libertarians are idiots, so I don't talk to them. But even they generally love it. They pretend that it's this great evil, but Ayn Rand also drew on her Social Security. But it's a very unifying thing. And that's what we need to get into, is universal, broad-based, redistributive policy that is not trying to narrowcast to this or that population, but is literally just set up for everybody. And the billionaires are going to be paying for it. Those are the kind of stabilizing forces that we need to really be thinking of coming out of this economic depression that we're in, and this pandemic that we're wallowing in. And winter is coming. It doesn't matter what Donald Trump says. We're not turning a corner. It is a slope up. Everything is going in the wrong direction right before winter, when everybody dies. Winter is the season of death. That's why we have Halloween, and we all talk about death right before the season of death. It's going to be bleak and bad. And to come out of that, we need to be thinking huge. We need to be thinking on the level of the New Deal. The creation of Social Security, the creation of unemployment insurance, the creation of the protection of workers to collectively bargain and form a union. We need to be thinking huge on that level, or we will just find ourselves wallowing in this for years.
Well, and because we talk about this all the time. This isn't terribly complicated to do. The complicated part is the lack of a willingness of our government to govern. And it's incredibly important that we talk about that. This is not some crazy nuanced policy thing where like, oh, we can't find the money. We can't find the technology. No, it's pretty easy. Like you make rich people pay their taxes. They pay the taxes. The taxes fund the public programs that lead to us not all dying in the middle of a ghastly preventable pandemic. This is not hard. And the way of making it seem difficult is an intentional obfuscation tactic. And it's one that we simply can't go along with and be complicit with.
And I'll do a translation for our MMT friends, which is the Pigouvian tax on rich people is also aimed at just reducing the number of billionaires, because we don't want billionaires because they're a destabilizing force. We can pay for whatever we want by just hitting enter on the computer that creates money. That's what we can do. We can pay for whatever we want. And then we can actually tax the super wealthy to help stabilize the country, because extreme inequality leads to destabilization, as you know, we talk about a lot here. And just watch Washington, D.C. work like clockwork when it comes to helping rich people, right? Like, it's not broken. It just doesn't work for the people right now. And we have to remember that and force DC to work for the people, which I think coming out of conflict and a crisis as huge as this pandemic and depression is going to be the moment to do so. But to get there, I do think we need, as we talk about a lot, to understand that the political playing board is an important one. We have to actually play on the political playing board and not on a dream one. We have to actually play on the one that we have in front of us. So we have to vote and elect people, and we don't get to just choose, it's not from the entire constellation of who you want, it's who's in front of us, and we have to keep getting better and better. We have to vote and then keep fighting. But this election is going to be a huge, huge event in the movement. And if Donald Trump wins, just think of how empowered him and his brown shirts are going to be, his red hats are going to be, and how difficult that will make it to build this world that we talk about, Jocelyn.
Speaking of the world we would like to build, hello, Dr. America. How are you doing?
Hi. Always glad to join right when, we talk about, like taking back and building like a better vision than what we've got now.
Well, I'm glad, because isn't that what you're going to be doing with us this morning?
Yeah, that's right. I got my official ballot from the Howard County, Maryland Board of Elections. And I thought I'd actually do my vote with the good team at Solidarity.
We are very honored to have you. This sounds like a lovely, important moment in your life. I just cast mine a couple days ago, and it was a good feeling. Like, all right, got it.
Yeah, and I mean, so I'm ready to start whenever you guys are.
No.
All right, let's vote with Dr. America.
Okay, let's do it. So, okay, I'm going to open up my ballot. And so in Maryland, you can request a mail-in ballot early, which is what I did. And they send you like kind of a practice ballot beforehand, which is really nice so that you get to see beforehand what you're going to be voting for. And it has the instructions so that it's not, completely new to you when this, official thing arrives. But yeah, got my official ballot. And for anybody watching who is worried about, are you allowed to, video a vote? Technically speaking, you are not allowed to video and do photography at the polling place. Like if you go to like a school and they have like, the gymnasium open and you, see all the ballot booths and everything, you're not allowed to do photography and video in those spaces. Mail-in, like, yeah, they don't really have rules about it. So we're going to take advantage of the absence of rules to broadcast a vote. So yeah, these are the instructions for mail-in voting. And I had read these beforehand, but it's the usual stuff about being very clear about how you bubble in, like, you know, you don't go outside the lines. If you want to write in a vote, which I don't plan on doing today, you know, it has, for people who are worried about the security of all of this barcode thing right here is how they know this is me. Like, this is how, like, you know, they keep it real as far as like knowing that this is, you know, I mean, this is uniquely my ballot. And so it's, you know, that's the integrity of the election being protected there. And then let's see, what was the last instruction thing that I thought was important? Oh yeah, let's see, if I was somebody who was helping somebody else vote, there's like a form in here that I would need to sign saying that I'm helping somebody with disabilities cast their ballot and all of that. But this is just on me. So, okay, let's get to the official ballot. That's the fun part. All right, so, okay, so official ballot will go right for the top. President and Vice President of the United States, I am voting for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So I've got my G2 black pen here. Sharpie makes a gel, which is also strong, but I'm a G2 guy. I know that that already is going to blow up the internet with like G2 versus Sharpie, but I'm G2. All right, so Joe Biden and Kamala
Take a
Harris.
strong stand. G2.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is as strong as my stand on Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, which for, okay, just to be like, you know, to like run through the rest of these options here, right? Like, I'm not going for Trump and Pence because I don't support fascism. And then with Joe Jorgensen and Jeremy Cohen, the libertarians are morons on their best day and monsters on their worst day. I mean, like, you know, things like there's no healthcare, but here's all the weed that you can smoke is hardly, you know, a platform that I'm going to get behind. I mean, like, come on, what is that? Like, you know, and then Howie Hawkins, Angela Walker from the Green Party, you know, okay, when it comes to like these third parties, like, especially if, like, you know, for the Green Party, the reason why they don't earn my trust is because show me an example of good governance by a Green Party politician, right? Like, you have got like hundreds of thousands of mayors across this country. I've never heard of a Green Party mayor doing a good job for their city or municipality. You know, I've never heard of like a state legislature with like, you know, a couple of Green Party people in it that have really done like, you know, significant work. And I'm like, there's like 50 governors, there's any number of state's attorney general, there's so many different offices, there's like over 400 like, you know, I mean, House of Representative seats, like, and I don't see a single one of those positions as evidence that yes, this party, once given an opportunity to govern, does a good job. And I'm like, that's a pretty like minimal standard to pass before I do something serious, like decide that, okay, you're going to get like, you know, the responsibilities of like nuclear codes. You're going to get like, you know, the drone hit list or whatever the hell it is that like we use to, you know, robotically kill people or whatever. Like, you know, I'm not giving you that. Like, you know, if you haven't like figured out how to clear snow after a blizzard, you know, like do some of the basic stuff, like make a fire department work. Like, I mean, like, you know, like these are some of the things that are day-to-day governance that if you haven't done it, I'm sorry, I can't trust you with like something as important as president. So, and you know, but coming back to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, like this to me, it took me a while because I was a strong Bernie supporter. I was, you know, a surrogate for the campaign, and I have to say, like, it took me a while to kind of like become a fan of Biden Harris, right? Like, you know, and I will say that like my first connection to this ticket was honestly Kamala Harris, because she comes from the part of India that her mom's side of the family comes from is the exact same part of India that my family comes from. So it's a lot of like personal identity right there. Like, you know, when she starts describing her trips to India and she starts like rattling off the names of the neighborhoods, I'm like, I know exactly where she's talking about. Like, I've got, you know, I mean, aunts and uncles and people who live exactly where she's talking about. So that sense of identity and seeing like some piece of yourself reflected in this high office is it's just huge. And so there's very much a kinship there, with that part of the ticket. Platform wise, I really appreciated it. I mean, put aside the public option, there are plans for prescription drugs. Like Alex, I mean, you can speak to this. I mean, probably just as well as I can. That I mean, the fact that they want Medicare to finally negotiate, against pharma, like that is a big deal. Like that is what we, I mean, yeah, you can say that it's, should have been done a long time ago, but like it's still like a big deal. Like that's actually a provision in Medicare for all that is going to save this country hundreds of billions of dollars. But more importantly, I don't want patients like, to sit in the parking lot of CVS and trying to figure out, am I going to afford prescriptions or my kids' school supplies or, some groceries? It's like, no, like this actually does like a job of getting rid of the false choice of, are you going to pay for prescriptions or not? So for all of those reasons, and and even their Diet Green New Deal, if you want to call it that, like, I mean, I think that like there's a lot there to support, a lot there to get excited about, and I'm enthusiastically supporting Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. This isn't just me doing it reluctantly or any of that nonsense. Anyway, representative in Congress for District 7, Kwesi Mfume. He is a former head of the NAACP, like, I mean, strong like on civil rights. Like, I feel that ever since Elijah Cummings passed, this has been a tough seat to fill, and I really do believe in his leadership. And I think that together, Marylanders are going to bring him on board for Medicare for all, and I believe that we can push him there. And the next part of the ballot that everybody gets like confused and intimidated by, and they tend to not vote, which is a big mistake, are these judgeships, right? So I actually did a little bit of research on these judges beforehand, and there's a judge of the circuit court, Circuit 5. I'm voting for Quincy Coleman. Just because like you Google any of these judges' names, honestly, doing the research is really not that bad. Like when I Googled, Quincy Coleman's name, I was really struck by how much he kept talking about the disparity, like racial disparities in the justice system in Maryland, and how he wanted to use this position of judge of the circuit court, Circuit 5, to start ending those disparities. So I'm voting for him. Similar reason, I'm voting for E. Gregory Wells for the Court of Special Appeals at Large. Now, this next one, Court of Special Appeals Circuit 3, the question is whether Catherine Grafe should get to continue in office or not. Now, the interesting thing about this one is that for those of you who have been listening to the Serial podcast, and about Adnan Syed and like the whole like doubt that has like kind of grown around like his guilt in that entire murder, situation. I mean, I can't say that I've listened to the podcast, but I know enough about that case where I'm like, there is a ton of doubt. The guy needs to have another trial. Like, we need to go through this evidence like much more diligently than maybe we did the first time. And he is going to get a new trial. But Catherine Grafe was the one dissenting person. She said that he should not get a new trial. So I kind of feel, when in doubt, try it out. She disagrees. So I'm going to say, no, we shouldn't continue in court like that, because when you got doubt, you got to try it out. Board of Education, District 2. I'm going with Antonia Barkley Watts, largely because I feel like she gets it as far as closing achievement gaps across the board for all children, regardless of their background. She got the endorsement of Our Revolution Maryland, which was also a big advantage for her. And yeah, I mean, I think that, anytime you can elevate Black female leadership, I say go for it, especially when they are such a strong progressive like Antonia Barkley Watts. So I'm really excited about that vote. And yeah, and then on the back here, I've got some questions, the constitutional amendments. I'm voting for the amendment that the Maryland State Assembly should be able to negotiate the budget. I don't think that Larry Hogan should get to decide everything unilaterally, or any governor should do that. Now, Alex, this whole thing about the question on gaming, okay, this was hot in our family. Like, this went back and forth, man. Like, because I kind of was like, yeah, like, let's just like vote for gaming. And then, you know, other members of my family were like, no, we don't know about that. And it's been an interesting debate, because one of the reasons why people have been kind of like, you know, skeptical about approving this gaming expansion is because, you know, previous expansions of gaming did not necessarily increase funding for education. It just replaced funding for education. And so I worry about that. But given the depression that we're in, given the austerity that is like, you know, coming down the pike, I'm going to vote for the gaming referendum, just because like I feel like kids' education needs all the help that it can get. And I hesitate to, you know, deny them that support. There's a redistricting question for Howard County, which I'm voting for. There's a term limit for the citizen boards of the Howard County Charter, which I'm voting for, just because I feel like anytime you can build some urgency, some sense of like, you know, you need to get moving on a job once you get to that job, like don't just sit there and, you know, and do nothing. I kind of like that. And then finally, there's an important question for Howard County to get new discrimination protections. And so this would protect people from discrimination based on disability, color, national origin, immigration status, age, occupation, marital status, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, family status, or personal appearance. I think that in the year of our Lord 2020, we need to be protecting people from all of that discrimination. So voting for the new discrimination protections. And that's my ballot, y'all. I've got it here, putting it in the pretty envelope and following. I read all the instructions beforehand, so spoiler alert, I already knew what I was supposed to be doing with my envelope and all of that. That's why I'm moving through this part a little bit faster. You have to sign, date, and I'm gonna do that. Today is what, the 23rd? And yeah, there is a ballot drop-off box at a nearby high school, and I will be dropping this off there to save on postage, and also because it's been a proven reliable way for Marylanders to turn in their ballots. And so there it is. Election 2020 done for Dr. America.
So much, Sanjeev. And everybody, like, thank you, Sanjeev, for being here. And please, vote by mail is safe. It is a reliable way to vote. Do not feel the president's crazy ramblings about how it's no, it's ridiculous. Vote by mail or vote in person if you feel safe. Just wear perhaps 2 masks while you do it. Safe social distance.
I mean, and honestly, like, you know, your board of elections, like if it's a good board of elections, you should be able to track your ballot. Like you should be, I mean, like I was able to track this from the moment I requested it. They were able to give me updates on the status of my request. And then once this gets sent in, I get to like, you know, track like how it's doing as far as like getting counted. So yeah, as Jocelyn said, this is totally safe. Everybody should be doing this. It's a great way to vote and participate, and you get to take your time. Like you're not like, you know, I mean, like rushing through this. You get to actually sit down and evaluate all this. If you haven't had a chance to do all the homework, you know, before you fill in the bubbles.
Thank you so much, Sanjeev, and thank you, Alex, and thank you, all of you. We will see you next week because I'm sure there will be lots to talk about. Have a great weekend.